Good hello, welcome to Creative Journal, my personal creative journal. I'm practicing how to make fire today, or at least I had practiced how to create fire. This is a finished piece, so I'm going to take you on a tour of what I learnt, what I discovered, and how I put it together. Recently I had some friends over and we did a bit of a game jam. My task is I had to animate some fire, and it's something that I'm not very well experienced at all. However, fortunately, sitting immediately behind me was James Lee. He makes some pretty cool stuff. Looks like this. As you can see, he's pretty good at effects animation. What else could be a better time to learn and get some decent feedback? I've been making some shapes and making no progress. So after picking his brain a little bit, was doing some demonstrations on his machine, eventually drew this diagram here. How many of us typically draw fire on the left, then his interpretation on the right. A couple of things clicked for me at this moment, not just the line of action going down the middle, but the fact that this had form. The base was one thing, but where it really came into play was on the second frame. Showing a ball moving up, flames surrounding it as it goes. Why'd I never thought of this before? Elements still having shape and form. Even something like a stream of bubbles still having a shape around it. So I went back to it, trying to figure out how the heck to actually pull this off. And unfortunately hit a snag almost immediately, involving the line of action going down the middle, because what I needed to do was to animate by hand just a flapping line. I'd never pulled that off successfully before. I mean, if on the first frame I'd do a shape like that, what happens on the next one? Where do I go? I suppose it would be sort of like that, but at which point do I make the next one come in and... oh dear. So at first I tried doing it with bones, just a shape that more or less goes straight up, putting bones down the middle, leaning all the way to the left and all the way to the right. A flapping motion can be created quite easily by pushing each set of the hierarchy down by just a couple of frames each, and you get a flapping motion. Very good for tails and things like that. But no, this wasn't the answer for making a flame. Finally, the answer hit me. It was so simple. Wavy line is really difficult, but a circle moving in a straight line is really easy. So what if I just drew 3 circles and animated them gradually moving up? Knowing when the next piece starts or when an old one stops is now much easier, because they're just circles. I know the spacing where they're meant to happen. They're crude, but that's okay. But now I've got a guide. All I had to do was trace around the circles. To my disbelief, it worked. More or less. It was a start, but now I had a new tool, a new technique, a new weapon. How could I integrate this? Well, more practice really. I tried having a core with a wavy line that moved, or even just a still with a more interesting shape. It was a particular kind of flame that I was after, something that looked almost lava lampy. It took a couple of tries, making different wifty shapes and trying to use the circles to push the shapes in a different direction. Bizarrely enough, in the end, I just sort of went for it. It's weird that I didn't actually need to use the lines or the circles in the result that actually worked, or at least worked well enough for me to go with it. But what I think I really learned, rather than a trick or a technique, was simply a new mindset. By practicing with those shortcuts enough times, it became a little bit embedded. I'm sure it's one of those things that I'm probably going to need to practice very regularly if it's going to stick. It'll probably all be gone next time I try fire, or probably any kind of elemental effect. But here's the shape that I ended up with. I reviewed it and watched it a lot and time again, and constantly tweaked and added new frames in here and there to keep it at a constant pace. Looping is usually the hardest part of making something organic like this. Fortunately, I was able to get into a pose where it was quite similar to the original, and pasted the first frame back down again and attempted to try and make an in-between, which funnily enough worked. It was probably just a coincidence though. Either way, at this point I was happy. I succeeded in pulling off something I didn't think I'd be able to do at all. At last came the part that I had a little bit more confidence in, which is which is plugging in all of the effects, giving it its glows and making it look all fancy. It still went through a number of different iterations, but at least I knew what was worth tweaking and changing in order to get some decent results. To my surprise, I thought I would need to ink over the original flame because it was just a brush tool. It was quite a crude one at that, with holes and bits of vectors jutting out everywhere. But there ended up being enough blur and brightness added to it that it was sort of just blended out, so I saved quite a lot of time not having to go back and trace over it again. However, I did go in with just the brush and the eraser and sort of carved and tidied up as many shapes as I could, as well as adding in many more frames for the dissolving of the embers. I showed it to friends, got some feedback, especially to James, who was still sitting behind me. We experimented with some different techniques and punched around different ideas. I think the most effective one was the advice to somehow make it fade off into a different color, starting yellow and then moving into red. The solution to pulling that off, rather than just chucking on a whole lot of effects and hoping for the best, was to provide the effect with a gradient like you see here. However, how do you apply something like that and keep it consistent across all those drawings in different shapes which are still broken up? Behold my network! I'll give you a quick tour as to how this is put together. If you're unfamiliar with Harmony's node network system, it's only available in Harmony Premium. Basically, it's your layers, but is spread out. It allows you to wire them together in all sorts of different ways that wouldn't be as possible if it were just in a list. Each thread is the layer being represented one time. The layer order is the further to the left, the higher up it'll be in the hierarchy. So my main fire layer, which is here, you can see is coming out at least 3 times. This gradient in the middle, however, is actually the most important piece, which fills the entire screen. The original shape is being masked into the gradient. So the rawest thread goes through 2 different glows. The first one is a bit of a mild blur, but it also adds some transparency, so when it's combined with other glows, it amplifies and builds upon itself. So the second one gives it a nice heat to it. What's important about both of these glows is that they are using the use source color option. Typically a glow will make use of just one color and bloom it over the entire thing. Using source color allows you to use as many colors that it can see. In this case, the yellow moving to orange. That's really blooming it. The third and fourth iterations of the effect are doing the same thing but to different levels of extremity. I'll show you on the first one. This is what the first one looks by itself. This is what the second one looks like by itself. You can see the first one in effect is this lighter portion, whereas the second one is the hot white core to it all. What they're comprised of is a matte resize which has been pushed in reverse. Giving it a negative number will shrink the size of the image. That's been glowed out with white, as has the other. Different levels of transparency and blurriness until it just looked right to me. The final step was using a apply peg transformation. These are a very fun piece because it allows you to put a peg at the bottom of a chain. Normally it has to be at the top where you decide where a layer's position is going to be. So applied peg transformation has a few different uses. Particularly, it allows you to have the same image exist in 2 different places at the same time. Its use in this case is pushing the original layer down just a bit. Not so much that will conflict with the original image, but enough to remove the focus of the center off the middle and bring it down to where most of the heat is going to be, at the bottom. All in all, it took quite a bit of work, quite a bit of practice to be able to pull off that one thing. But I hope it acts as an encouragement to try something similar, to open up a blank layer and just make scribbles on different frames and throw something together as fast as you can. Do it over and over, get people to look at it, see what they think, point it in a better direction. I'd be interested to see some of your results, please tweet them at me. This has been Creative Journal, thanks for joining me, have some fun and I'll see you in the next one.